Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we are going to talk about a book that is very, very surprising. The title is American Rose, subtitled, very important, A Nation Laid Bare, The Life and Times of Gypsy Rose Lee by Karen Abbott, and it's published by Random House. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me, Jim.
This is an absolutely amazing book because I think it accomplishes as much as it does. It's examining a woman whom Life magazine a long time ago described as the only woman in the world without a public body.
No, with a public body and a private mind.
With a public body and a private mind.
Both equally exciting.
Both equally exciting.
Yeah.
That's the subject of this. And you go at it in a very, deep and comprehensive way.
Thanks.
She was a mother to Eric Preminger, which surprised me, probably because of my level of stupidity, who calls her an array of complexities and contradictions. Her sister was June Havoc, and she died in 2010, and you spent quite a bit of time with her. And Gypsy's mythology, peeling away the punchlines and fanciful digressions to reveal the core truth. That's what you said June helped you to do. She feels that love never existed between the two sisters at all, and after reading the book, I would agree. Maybe respect. And that she was nothing more than a knot in Gypsy Rose's life. That's a sad thing for a sister to say.
Yeah, it was their relationship, and the relationship with their mother was probably the most fascinating part of my research. And just what these two sisters endured and how they survived the antics of their mother, and the way their mother tried to turn them against each other from a very young age. You can tell, see why they would have such a tumultuous relationship, and why they would sort of circle around each other and be close and move away and be close again. And June, they inflicted wounds on each other throughout their lives. And June at the end said she always forgave Gypsy, but she never forgot. The book is full of sort of incidents about the two of them and ways they slighted each other, and ways that they really might have tried to be close but couldn't quite get there.
Given the nature of their mother, this was a very horrible thing for them to do to each other, because the mother didn't need any help in screwing up lives or anger and forcing people to do things.
Yeah, the mother, if anybody is familiar with the mother at all from the musical or from the play, where she's played by, Ethel Merman in the original musical and Rosalind Russell in the movie, that woman, she's presented as this eccentric sort of pushy stage mother who's ambitious, but it doesn't really scratch the surface of who this woman was and how crazy this woman was and how disturbed mentally she was. And June Havoc called their mother a beautiful little ornament that was damaged. And in order for Gypsy to, become Gypsy Rose Lee and to survive this woman, she had to, in order to become who she became, she had to survive this mother, who turned her and June against each other. She fed them on $1 a day. While she carried $30,000 in a bag tied around her waist. This woman seduced men and women in equal numbers for all sorts of nefarious purposes. She threatened to blackmail Gypsy later on in her life for every dark and secret thing she did before making it big. And she literally killed more than once to get her daughters on stage. And there's a few places in the book where the bodies start piling up a little bit. Which is never mentioned in the musical or the movie, of course.
No. I mean, that's the kinds of thing that you've, if you'll excuse the expression, that you've dug up.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, one of Gypsy's novels was called Mother Finds a Body. And a little touch autobiographical there.
Yeah, after killing same,
exactly.
Mother finds a body. The other thing, in the level of her craziness, the mother really redefines for me, for all time, the definition of stage mother.
Yeah.
I'd stay away from that term from now on. I mean, she's incredible.
I think she was actually the original stage mother. I can't think of anyone who would have set that tone for that, or who she's the archetype. I think she was the premier stage mother. And of course, people like Dina Lohan have nothing on her today. This was the original stage mother, and I think everyone else pairs by comparison, especially when you actually know who the real Rose Hovick was, as opposed to the one who's portrayed famously on Broadway and in the movie.
Let us not think for a moment out there that this is just the story of Gypsy Rose Lee growing up. It is also the story of her many accomplishments in the literary world. For example, she wrote The G-String Murders. I love that title. She also ran a place in New York, I think on East 63rd Street. Was it in that house?
That was her home. She had a mansion on East 63rd Street.
The sleepover writing salon.
Oh, that was actually in Brooklyn.
Oh, that was in Brooklyn.
Yeah, her house was in Manhattan, but she, for a time, was very desperate to become taken seriously as a writer. She wanted the accolades and acceptance of people like New York's literati and the Algonquin Round Table and H.L. Mencken, who eventually coined the word ecdysiast in her honor.
Say that word again.
Ecdysiast, which was Greek for shedding or casting or stripping off. So that was H.L. Mencken's nod to Gypsy Rose Lee.
The most highfalutin name for a stripper in the history of the American English language.
Exactly. And she was desperate to be taken seriously by these people. And so she moved into this writer's colony in Brooklyn and lived there with W.H. Auden and Benjamin Britten and Carson McCullers.
Well, there were many men in Gypsy's life, 3 of whom she married. I think it's 3. One she really wanted to marry, but never did. We'll find out why when we come back.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
American Rose, A Nation Laid Bare, The Life and Times of Gypsy Rose Lee by Karen Abbott. That's the book today. The publisher is Random House. And our friends over at Vogue magazine, in evaluating the book, had this to say: not just the queen of burlesque, and that's the point we tried to make in the first segment. She was Dorothy Parker in a G-string, as Abbott dubs her in her rollicking new biography, which, through extensive research and new interviews with Gypsy's son and sister, peels away. Come on, Vogue. Peels away a few more shimmering layers to get to the woman behind the mystique. I want to talk a little bit about the research, of which there is a lot. There's a whole, bunch of notes in the back of the book, which I'm sure spring from the research, and they are considerable. And you also make a point, I think, in your introduction about how you worked with dialogue. Yeah. Would you share that with us?
Oh, sure. And with this kind of material in general, I don't make anything up. It's a true nonfiction book. Dialogue is not invented. Anything in quotes comes from an interview or an article or an archive. But I like to write nonfiction that is novelistic, and that, to me, it's sort of what's the point of writing about people who have been dead for decades if you don't bring them back to life in some really real, visceral way? And so to that extent, I like to try to use novelistic techniques that bring them to life, but only using the facts that are at hand. So if I jump into Gypsy's head, and I say this in my author's note, if I jump into her head at all, it's only using the most careful consideration of my research and knowing that, she herself had this thought. She articulated this thought, or having known how she reacted in this instance, I can sort of make a very educated guess as to what she was thinking based on her behavior at the moment. Things like that. You're not
shoving it in there. It's something that makes a lot of sense in terms of the research that you've done.
Yeah.
Is this desire also the reason why I think one of the reviewers say that you jump around chronologically.
Well, I jump around chronologically because I don't think Gypsy lived her life in a linear fashion. She was a nonlinear person. She's somebody who constantly reinvented herself. Who moved backward as often as she did forward. And I didn't think she'd be served by a beginning, middle, end narrative. And I wanted to structure the book like a striptease. And show a little bit here and pull back, and show a little bit there and pull back, and until everything was revealed there was to reveal about her. And so that's where I got that. I thought she'd really be ill-served by a linear narrative.
And this approach, I think, works very, very well. And you're disclosing or giving us the history of the Minsky brothers.
Yeah.
Because you do a lot of jumping around with those cats.
Yeah.
And that makes it makes a lot of sense.
Oh, well, thank you.
Makes a lot of sense. As I read the book, I kept thinking, and maybe you're not supposed to think these kind of thoughts, that Gypsy's life would have been much different, perhaps better, if things had worked out with Michael Todd. I mean, they worked together on a show starring Gotter. She took off for Chicago at his behest immediately.
Yeah.
And then he dumps her.
One of the questions to me in the book was Gypsy really capable of loving anyone aside from her own creation? Not even her person of Rose Louise Hovick, the name she was born under, but the creation she carefully crafted of Gypsy Rose Lee.
I'm quite sure she could not love the person that she was.
Yeah.
Dragging along her history, her biography. Yeah. And that's why she had to create somebody else.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And she had a very conflicted relationship with that creation as well. It didn't always do what she wanted it to do. It didn't always achieve what she wanted it to achieve. And it was, I think I write in the book that she lived in an exquisite trap she herself had set. But this is all to say that if she were capable of loving another person, one of those people I think was her mother in a very twisted, unhealthy way. And the other was Michael Todd. Mm-hmm. And I think they got each other. He, too, was this creature that constantly reinvented himself and that had a past that he really would rather not have visited. Mm-hmm. And June Havoc said the relationship was money at first sight.
At one point, you sum up, I think, in a very good way, the woman that we're talking about. She's adored by both New York literati and its longshoremen. She is a strutting, bawdy, erudite conundrum belonging to everyone but known by none. She has to admit that Bill, that's her current or about to be husband at this point, she has to admit that Bill, for all that he isn't and for all he'd never be to her, understands her better than most.
Yeah, I think he, because there was no love there, he was able to see her clearly and knew what she was in that for.
Yeah.
So he writes quite a poignant letter to her there that I reproduced in the book. It's never been published before.
Never been published.
No, none of the letters in the book have ever been published before.
That is a great letter from him.
Yeah.
That really is. That really is. It appears that Rose, June, and Louise were real stars during vaudeville's, era. Talk about what being on the road was like with them. Well,
vaudeville was one of the most fascinating parts of my research. I could have kept going on there, and just the characters that they ran into. There was the man called Amazing Regurgitator, if you recall him. The guy who would swallow a gallon of water and a pint of kerosene and eject the kerosene and blow up a little castle and then extinguish the fire. And they, the girls never had formal education. They traveled with this menagerie of animals on the road and was quite an unconventional childhood.
We'll look some more at that when we come back. And the other thing is that it seems to me that Louise / Gypsy was waiting in the wings. But at a certain point, it is her time. Stay tuned to find out what she does.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter @JimFosterCoc and email Jim Foster, COC@gmail.com.
This is Conversations on the Coast. Today we're joined by Karen Abbott, and she's here to talk about her latest book, American Rose, A Nation Laid Bare, The Life and Times of Gypsy Rose Lee, published by Random House. And our friends at Publishers Weekly like the book. Imaginative, engaging, Abbott's biography of the celebrated stripper. See, that's terrible that they say that. Celebrated strippers, though there's nothing else to it. But, okay. Who died in 1970 at age 59, also proves a well-informed look at the evolution of musical theater in the early 20th century. Abbott's work, cutting fluidly between decades and recreating dialogue, captures this dizzying, sullying, transformative era in America. Whoopee! That's nice words. Nice words. Now, one of the things, when we get into the vaudeville, and you talked about the traveling family and the menagerie, and in each town they went through to add to the act, they would acquire, I think that's the best word I can use, young boys who were part of the, if you will, song and dance, which did not star Louise/Rose, but June Havoc.
Yeah, June Havoc was a dance prodigy, and she was able to spin on point like a ballerina by the age of 2. And Gypsy was about 4 years old when the vaudeville act started, and she couldn't do anything. And she was this sort of pudgy, awkward kid who had these awkward teeth that were pointed in the front, and she had this lisp. And she really had no talent. So June was the head of the vaudeville act. And Gypsy, the name of the act was Dainty June and her Newsboy Songsters. And Gypsy, or Louise as she was still called, acted as a newsboy songster. But one of the numbers featured a dancing cow. And I asked June about this number and about the act. And Gypsy always claimed that she worked the back end of the cow. But June said she never worked the back end of a cow. She couldn't dance that well. And so, again, the sisters' rivalry was showing up there. But they were one of the most popular vaudeville acts in the country from about 1922 to 1927.
Things never go really smoothly in this family.
Yeah.
And at one point, June decides it's time to marry and run away. And so she does. And there goes the star.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's going at this point is vaudeville.
Yeah.
And that is the time when Louise/Rose goes out on her own.
Yeah, it was a very difficult year for Gypsy, or for Louise, as she was still called at this time. When vaudeville died, which was partly a function of talking movies becoming very popular.
Yeah.
And before she was discovered by Minsky's Burlesque in New York City. This is a year she never liked to talk about. This is the year that was not in the musical or in her memoir. Nobody really knew about this. And she and her mother were desperate. They were starving. They often ate dog food to survive. And she was forced to do things against her will during this time. I spoke to both Gypsy's son and her sister about this period, and they talked about how difficult it was for her and the unsavory characters and situations she found herself in, and sort of, this period would also be what her mother would draw from later on when she decides to blackmail her.
Yeah. Some of the stuff that was going on was really nasty.
Yeah.
The other thing that's going on is that Louise is creating Gypsy Rose Lee.
Yeah.
Leaving Louise behind. Louise is, I would describe her maybe as dumpy and not a showbiz personality. And was it under Minsky's guidance that she was able to do this?
Well, she started before that. There was during this very difficult year, and she started finding her way. And what she did was use her intellect. This is somebody who didn't have a lot of formal schooling, but was very naturally smart, was well read, always read as a kid on the vaudeville circuit, and was incredibly ambitious. Even when she realized, I can't sing, I can't dance, I don't have any talent, she always had it in the back of her mind that she was going to be a star. When she was a kid on the vaudeville circuit, she would doodle one word, the word money, over and over again. And so she always had this ambition. And with that in mind, she figured, well, what do I have at my disposal? And she had her brain. She had her wit. She had a facile mind. She had a great sense of humor. And she had a distance from sex. This is an accidental sex symbol, somebody who was able to see the humor in sex. And people really had never seen that before, and they responded to that.
Did they? Wow.
Yes, they did.
She was quite the star.
Yeah.
She was really a great star. And that form of, if I can say it, vaudeville, burlesque, survived the Depression years.
Yeah.
And, she was making money.
She was, when she started off at Minsky's Burlesque, when she finally became discovered, 11,000 people a week were coming to see her. 11,000 people a week. She was an immediate star at Minsky's. And it was, it was a sensation. And I think part of it, I try to think who I would just compare her to today.
Yeah.
And I'd like to say if Lady Gaga and Dorothy Parker had a secret love child, it would have been Gypsy Rose Lee. And part of that was just her dramatic presence. She would show up at opening nights at the Met wearing a full-length cape made of orchids. And I just read recently that Lady Gaga is obsessed with Gypsy Rose Lee. And, of course, she showed up somewhere recently wearing a full-length cape made of meat.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. So orchids, I would prefer orchids, but you could see anyone who considers herself a provocateur today is drawing from Gypsy's playbook.
Wow. Well, if you think you know Gypsy Rose Lee, this is the book for you. If you want to be honest and admit that you don't know Gypsy Rose Lee, this is the book for you. It's one you shouldn't miss. It's called American Rose, A Nation Laid Bare. The Life and Times of Gypsy Rose Lee by Karen Abbott. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at Jim Foster COC and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.